I always hated yoga. Something about the way Alex talked about it rubbed me the wrong way. You should try it, Jake, she'd say, her voice light, teasing. It might help with that tension in your shoulders. You carry stress like it's a badge of honor. She'd laugh, ruffling my hair as she passed by. Her yoga mat rolled under one arm. She'd been going for about a year now, 3 times a week every week. I didn't mind at first. After all, Alex and I had been together for 4 years, married for 2. We had trust, didn't we? But over the past few months, things had shifted. Little things, unspoken things. She started staying late after class, claiming she was grabbing smoothies with her yoga friends. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now seemed permanently glued to her side. Then there was Jason. I met him once, briefly, when Alex convinced me to try a class. He was her instructor, tall, lean, and the kind of guy who looked like he just stepped out of an athletic wear catalog. He was charming in that effortless way that made my skin crawl. He shook my hand with a grip that felt like a challenge and smiled at Alex like they shared some secret joke. "You've got a natural, Jake," he said after I fumbled my way through the class. Alex laughed too loud, brushing her hair back. The tension in my shoulders was still there when we left. Stronger even. A couple of months later, I started noticing Alex humming around the house, more often than not wearing that sly little smile of hers. She'd slip into the bathroom with her phone, emerging a half-hour later, cheeks flushed. When I asked what was so funny, she'd wave it off, just a group chat thing. But there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, like she knew I wouldn't buy it. I told myself I was overreacting, paranoid. But late one night, when her phone buzzed and she jumped to grab it, something inside me broke. While she was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone, and just like that, the foundation of our marriage cracked. Her messages were encrypted, one of those disappearing apps. But there was one she hadn't cleared yet. It wasn't even long. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for Thursday." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. I sat there on the edge of our bed, staring at the screen, my chest hollow and heavy at the same time. Thursday, another yoga night. When she came out of the bathroom, toweling off her hair, she looked at me with her usual warm, tired smile. "What are you still doing up?" I swallowed the rage clawing its way up my throat. "Couldn't sleep?" I lied, thinking about tomorrow's meeting. She kissed me on the forehead like nothing was wrong, like our world wasn't about to explode. "You work too hard," she murmured before crawling into bed beside me. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, plotting my next move. The following day, I couldn't focus at work. Every email, every meeting, every conversation blurred into static. All I could think about was that text and the shadow of Jason's face. My mind ran in loops, trying to convince itself there could be an explanation, some innocent reason Alex would be talking to him outside of class. But deep down, I knew better. That evening, I went through the motions. Dinner was quiet, just the clinking of forks and Alex's soft hum as she flipped through her phone. She was glowing again, her cheeks flushed like they'd been after yoga. I watched her as she ate, her smile small but persistent. She hadn't even noticed I hadn't touched my food. "Are you okay?" she asked finally, tilting her head. "You seem off." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day at the office." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You need to take better care of yourself, Jake. Stress will kill you if you let it." Her thumb brushed my knuckles, soft and affectionate, but the warmth I usually felt wasn't there. Her touch felt foreign now, deceptive. I excused myself early, claiming I needed to prep for a morning meeting, but the truth was I couldn't sit there any longer. Her laughter followed me down the hall, light and carefree, as if she wasn't texting another man while I lay beside her every night. Once in the bedroom, I grabbed my laptop and opened a private browser. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I started with the basics: GPS trackers, recording devices, discrete surveillance cameras. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through options, each product description making me feel a little sicker. This wasn't who I was. This wasn't the husband I wanted to be. But then again, she wasn't the wife I thought she was either. By the time she joined me in bed, my shopping cart was full, and my stomach churned with guilt. She slid in next to me, curling against my side, her warmth like a weight. "I hate that you're always so busy," she murmured, her voice tinged with faux concern. You work too hard. I bit back the urge to ask if Jason worked too hard. Instead, I kissed her temple, tasting the lie on her skin. It's for us, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. All for us. She hummed, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. I lay there, rigid, listening to her soft breathing, thinking about the gear I'd just ordered. It would arrive in 2 days. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to hold my tongue. The next morning, Alex left early for yoga. She kissed me goodbye, her smile almost too bright. Have a good day, babe, she said as she walked out the door. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before grabbing my keys. I didn't have to work that morning, and I wasn't going to waste it. My destination was clear, the yoga studio. The yoga studio was tucked into the corner of a strip mall, sandwiched between a juice bar and a boutique that sold overpriced candles. I parked far enough away to avoid being seen and watched for a moment. The building's large glass windows revealed an open room filled with sunlight and sleek wood floors. Inside, women stretched on mats, their movements fluid and graceful. It didn't take long to spot Alex. She was near the front, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing leggings I didn't recognize and a top that seemed just a little tighter than the one she usually wore. My stomach twisted as Jason walked in. He was all broad shoulders and easy confidence, with that same damn smirk I remembered from my one ill-fated class. He greeted everyone warmly, but when his eyes landed on Alex, something shifted, something unmistakable. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I told myself to stay calm, to think rationally, but my thoughts were a storm of rage and humiliation. This was my wife, the woman I'd promised to protect and cherish, looking at another man like he hung the moon. I waited until the class began, then slipped into the juice bar next door. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and positioned myself by the window, giving me a clear view of the studio. Every time Jason adjusted Alex's posture, every time he lingered just a little too long, I felt the crack in my chest widen. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She laughed at his jokes, leaned into his touch. She was giving him parts of herself that used to belong to me. By the time the class ended, my coffee was cold, untouched. Alex and Jason chatted as the students trickled out, her face alight with the kind of joy she hadn't shown me in weeks. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Whatever she said made him laugh, and he reached out, brushing his hand against hers. I wanted to burst through the door, grab her by the arm, and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Proof. When Alex finally left the studio, Jason followed close behind. She got in her car, and he stood by the curb, watching her drive off. I waited until he went back inside, then approached the building. The receptionist looked up as I walked in, her smile polite but wary. Hi, I said, feigning nervousness. I was thinking of signing up for a class. Is Jason available? I heard he's the best. Her face softened. He's amazing, she said, her voice brightening. Let me grab him. A moment later, Jason appeared, all easy charm. Hey there, he said, extending a hand. I'm Jason, thinking about joining the yoga world. I shook his hand, my grip firm. Something like that, I replied. I've heard great things. For the next 10 minutes, I played the part of an interested new client. I asked about his classes, his teaching style, even his credentials. He answered every question with practiced ease, completely unaware of who I was or why I was really there. As I left, he handed me a business card. Give me a call if you have any questions, he said, flashing that same smug smile. I'd love to help you get started. I pocketed the card, forcing a tight smile. I'll do that. Back in my car, I sat in silence, gripping the card so tightly it bent. Jason had no idea who I was, and that was exactly how I wanted it. For now, the surveillance gear would arrive tomorrow. I would set everything up, and then I'd wait. No more guesses, no more doubts. I needed the truth, raw, undeniable, and inescapable. But most of all, I needed to plan my next move. The next morning, the package arrived, a nondescript box delivered to my office. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing the tools that would uncover the truth. Miniature cameras, audio recording devices, and a GPS tracker. Each piece felt like a betrayal in my hands, a violation of the trust we had once shared. But that trust had already been shattered. This was just collecting the pieces. I spent the afternoon preparing, reading manuals, and testing equipment. The cameras were small enough to hide in plain sight, the audio devices sensitive enough to catch even the faintest whisper. Everything was ready by the time Alex came home that evening. She greeted me with her usual warmth, planting a kiss on my cheek before setting down her yoga bag. "How was your day?" she asked, smiling as she rummaged through the fridge. "Busy," I replied, forcing my voice to stay even. "Yours?" She shrugged, pulling out a bottle of wine. "Same as always. Yoga, errands, the usual." I watched her pour a glass, her movements so casual, so unbothered. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand she tell me where she really was, who she was really with. But I held back. I needed proof, real proof. Not just suspicions or a few cryptic texts. That night, after Alex fell asleep, I began my work. The cameras were easy to place. One in the bedroom, hidden among the books on her nightstand. Another in the living room, camouflaged within the decor. I slipped the audio recorder into her yoga bag, then installed the GPS tracker under her car. By the time I was done, it was nearly dawn, and my heart was pounding in my chest. When I finally crawled into bed, Alex stirred beside me, mumbling something incoherent. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. But there was no turning back now. I had to know. The first recordings came in the next day. At work, I logged into the secure server I'd set up and played back the audio from her yoga bag. It was mostly ambient noise, car doors slamming, muffled conversations. But then came her voice. "Jason, you're impossible," she said, her tone light, flirtatious. His voice followed, smooth and confident. "You love it." I clenched my fists under my desk, forcing myself to keep listening. Their banter was casual, harmless on the surface, but the way they spoke to each other, the ease, the intimacy, was unmistakable. The camera footage was worse. That evening, while I pretended to work in my office, I watched her in the living room, texting furiously. I couldn't see the screen, but her expression said it all. The quick smiles, the suppressed laughter. At one point, she leaned back against the couch, staring at her phone with a dreamy look I hadn't seen in months. It was like watching a stranger. By the third day, the evidence was undeniable. Audio, video, GPS. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. She wasn't just cheating. She was building a relationship, something deeper, something personal. And Jason wasn't just a fling. He was her escape. That evening, Alex mentioned she was going to yoga again. "I might grab a drink with the group after," she added, almost as an afterthought. "Don't wait up." I nodded, my face a mask of indifference. "Have fun." She left a few minutes later, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder, her lips glossy with a shade of red I didn't recognize. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, the GPS tracker lighting up on my screen. She wasn't heading to the studio. She was heading to him. I didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, I stayed behind, reviewing the footage and planning my next step. Revenge wasn't just about justice. It was about precision, timing, and impact. By the time she returned home that night, I had my plan. And Jason? He had no idea what was coming. Alex came home late that night, slipping through the front door as quietly as she could. I was sitting in the living room, a book in my hands, but I wasn't reading. The hum of the GPS tracker still echoed in my mind, the flashing that on the screen confirming exactly where she had been. I didn't look up as she entered. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, almost cautious. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just couldn't sleep." She hesitated for a moment, lingering in the doorway. "How was your evening?" I closed the book and set it down, finally meeting her eyes. "Quiet." She nodded, offering a faint smile before disappearing into the bedroom. I waited until I heard the shower running before heading to my office. Her yoga bag was on the kitchen counter, and I grabbed it on my way. Inside, the audio recorder had done its job. Every word, every laugh, every lingering pause between her and Jason was there. It was damning, infuriating, but I needed more. The next morning, I waited for Alex to leave for work before pulling out my phone. Jason's business card was still in my wallet, crumpled but legible. I dialed the number, my stomach churning as it rang. "Hello." His voice was just as smug over the phone as it was in person. "Hi, Jason," I said, forcing a friendly tone. "This is Jake. We spoke at the studio a few days ago about joining your class." "Of course," he said, his enthusiasm almost sickening. "What can I do for you?" "I was thinking of signing up for some private sessions," I said. "You seem like the right guy to help me get started." There was a brief pause. Then his voice brightened even further. "Absolutely. I've got some availability this week. When are you free?" "Tomorrow," I said without hesitation. "Afternoon, if that works for you." "Perfect. Let's do 2 o'clock." I hung up, my mind already racing ahead. This wasn't just about catching him off guard. It was about positioning myself, getting closer, learning his weaknesses. If Alex thought Jason was her safe haven, her escape, then I needed to make sure that illusion shattered. The next day, I arrived at the studio early. Jason greeted me with a broad smile, his hand extended in welcome. "Jake, great to see you again." "Thanks for making the time," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate it." He let me into the studio, chatting casually about the benefits of yoga and his passion for teaching. I played along, feigning interest, asking just enough questions to keep him talking. He was good at this, too good. It wasn't hard to see how someone like Alex could fall for his charm. But charm only goes so far. Halfway through the session, as we worked through some basic poses, I started steering the conversation. "You've got a pretty tight-knit group here," I said, keeping my tone light. "Feels like everyone knows everyone." Jason laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, it's a great community. People come for the workout, but they stay for the connections, you know? Must be nice," I said, holding a pose longer than necessary. "Building those relationships. Do you ever, cross the line? Get too close?" His smile faltered for a split second, just long enough for me to catch it. "I keep things professional," he said quickly, his tone a little too defensive. I nodded, letting the silence stretch. "That's good to hear. My wife speaks highly of you. Says you're a great teacher." The color drained slightly from his face, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, who's your wife?" "Alex," I said, keeping my gaze steady. "She's been coming here for about a year now." Jason froze, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly scrambling for the right words. "Relax," I said, smiling just enough to unsettle him. "She loves your classes. Can't stop talking about them." That's great to hear," he stammered, his usual swagger nowhere to be found. I clapped him on the shoulder, holding his gaze a beat too long. "Looking forward to the next session, Jason. You're exactly the kind of guy I've been looking for." I left him standing there, his confusion palpable. The seed was planted. Now it was just a matter of watering it. Jason's discomfort lingered in my mind as I drove away from the studio. He wasn't just rattled, he was spooked. And that's exactly what I wanted. This wasn't just about Alex anymore. It was about unraveling the man she had chosen to betray me with. That evening, Alex was in her usual routine, texting on the couch, humming softly to herself. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the weight of what I knew pressing heavily on my chest. She'd been so comfortable, so confident that her secret was safe. It almost felt insulting, but I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not until I had everything in place. The next morning I called Jason. He answered on the first ring, his voice a little too eager. "Jake, hey, man, what's up? Just wanted to say thanks for yesterday," I said, keeping my tone light. "You were right. Yoga's exactly what I needed." "Glad to hear it," he said, his enthusiasm forced. "Looking forward to helping you on your journey." "Actually," I said, letting a pause hang in the air, "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a drink sometime. You know, talk more about the studio, your approach, all that." There was a brief hesitation. Sure," he said finally. "When were you thinking?" "Tonight," I said. "There's a bar near the studio. First round's on me." Jason agreed, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. I hung up, satisfied. This wasn't just about making him sweat. It was about putting myself in his orbit, forcing him to acknowledge me in ways he wouldn't forget. That evening, I arrived at the bar early, choosing a booth in the back. Jason showed up a few minutes later, his casual demeanor marred by a hint of unease. He smiled as he slid into the seat across from me, but his eyes flicked toward the door like he was already planning an escape route. "Glad you could make it," I said, signaling the waiter. "What's your poison?" "Whiskey neat," he said, his voice steady but cautious. We made small talk at first. Work, hobbies, the usual. Jason was careful, keeping the conversation superficial, but I was patient. I let him settle into the rhythm of the evening, watching his guard drop with each sip of whiskey. "So," I said, eventually leaning forward, "let's talk about Alex." Jason froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "What about her?" he asked, his tone guarded. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "She's mentioned you a lot. Says you're a great teacher. Very attentive." Jason set his glass down, his fingers tightening around it. "I try to give all my students the attention they need," he said carefully. "Of course," I said, nodding. "But she seems to think you go above and beyond. Makes me wonder what else she's getting from these sessions." He shifted uncomfortably, his composure cracking. "Look, Jake," he said, his tone firm. "I don't know what you're implying, but—" I cut him off, my voice low and sharp. "I'm not implying anything, Jason. I am stating facts. I know exactly what's been going on between you two. The late-night texts, the private conversations, the excuses." I leaned in closer, my gaze piercing. "I know everything." Jason paled, his bravado completely gone. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way he squirmed under my stare. "You should have been more careful," I said finally, my voice cold. "But it's too late for that now." He swallowed hard, his atoms apple-bobbing. "What do you want?" I leaned back, smiling again. "Nothing yet, but you'll know when the time comes." Jason stared at me, his breathing shallow, his confidence shattered. He was no longer the smug yoga instructor who had stolen my wife's attention. He was a man caught in a trap he didn't even understand yet. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table. "Enjoy your drink, Jason," I said as I walked away. "You're going to need it." That night, I couldn't sleep. The rush of the encounter replayed in my mind, the power shift intoxicating. I wasn't just waiting for the truth to reveal itself anymore. I was pulling the strings, setting the stage. The revenge I had in mind would be unconventional. But when it was all over, neither Jason nor Alex would see it coming. The next few days were a waiting game. I monitored the cameras and audio like a hawk, capturing every interaction, every moment of Alex's betrayal. My conversations with Jason had planted the seeds of doubt, and now I was watching them grow. Alex seemed oblivious to the tension brewing beneath the surface. She laughed more at her phone, hummed songs I didn't recognize, and moved through the house with an air of freedom that made my stomach turn. She still played the part of the devoted wife, but I could see through it now. Every smile, every kiss, every touch felt rehearsed. A performance. Jason, on the other hand, was unraveling. He canceled one of our follow-up yoga sessions and responded to my texts with one-word answers. The once confident instructor was now jumpy, his cracks widening with each passing day. I knew he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, dreading what I might do next. That was exactly what I wanted. On Friday night, Alex announced she was heading to a yoga retreat for the weekend, a first as far as I could remember. She was nonchalant about it, tossing a bag into the trunk of her car and kissing me goodbye with the ease of someone who believed their secret was safe. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she said, her tone light. "Don't work too hard while I'm gone." "I won't," I replied, forcing a smile. "Enjoy the retreat." As her car disappeared down the street, I logged into the GPS tracker. The dot on the map didn't head toward any yoga retreat. It headed straight for Jason's apartment. I waited an hour before following, giving them plenty of time to settle in. When I finally parked down the block, their cars were both in the driveway, the lights in Jason's apartment glowing faintly through the blinds. My heart raced as I stared at the building, imagining what was happening inside. But I wasn't here for confrontation, not yet. Instead, I opened the trunk of my car and pulled out a box I'd prepared earlier that day. Inside was everything I needed to take this game to the next level. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. The cameras I had placed around Jason's apartment were small, discreet, and strategically positioned. One covered the entrance, another the living room window, and the last one the bedroom. I didn't need live footage this time. I'd set them to record automatically, ensuring I captured every angle. Satisfied with my work, I drove home, my mind buzzing with anticipation. I didn't sleep that night, replaying my plan over and over until every detail was perfect. The weekend passed slowly, each hour dragging as I waited for Alex to return. On Sunday evening, she walked through the door with a radiant smile, her hair slightly disheveled and her cheeks flushed. She kissed me on the cheek and dropped her bag by the stairs. "How was the retreat?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Wonderful," she said, her eyes bright. "So relaxing. I feel like a new person." I nodded, hiding the bile rising in my throat. "Glad to hear it." That night, while Alex slept soundly beside me, I retrieved the footage from Jason's apartment. As I watched, my hands shook with anger and disgust. They were careless, oblivious to the world outside their little bubble. Laughter, kisses, whispers of promises they had no right to make. It was all there, everything I needed. The next day, I called Jason again. This time he didn't answer. I left a single voicemail, my tone calm and measured. "We need to talk. Tonight. I'll be at the studio at 8. Be there." He didn't reply, but I knew he'd show. He had no choice. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. This was about destruction, complete and irreversible. And Jason would be the first to fall. The yoga studio was empty when I arrived, save for the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. I chose a spot near the front, deliberately facing the door so Jason would see me the moment he walked in. He arrived at exactly 8:03. His usually confident gait was gone, replaced by hesitant, shuffling steps. He looked tired, the weight of the past few days etched into his face. When his eyes met mine, he froze, his hand gripping the strap of his gym bag like it was a lifeline. "Jake," he said, forcing a weak smile. "What's going on?" I gestured to the mat across from me. "See." He hesitated, but eventually complied, lowering himself onto the mat like a man awaiting his sentence. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm, before finally pulling my phone from my pocket. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, tapping the screen. He shook his head, his eyes darting between me and the device. "It's everything," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Every text, every call, every moment you've spent with my wife." Jason paled, his breathing quickening. "Look, Jake, I don't know what you think is—" "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't insult me with denials. I've seen it all. The texts, the calls, the yoga retreats." His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "You thought you could steal my wife, play the charming instructor, and walk away unscathed?" I asked, my voice low and deliberate. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" "Jake, I didn't mean," he began, his voice shaking. "You didn't mean what?" I interrupted, my tone razor-sharp. "Didn't mean to fall into bed with another man's wife? Didn't mean to smile in my face while you were screwing her behind my back?" He flinched, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I swear." "But it did," I said, leaning back. "And now you're going to deal with the consequences." Jason stared at me, his fear palpable. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You'll find out soon enough." The next morning, I sent the files to his employer. Every damning photo, every explicit text, every compromising video. Jason's polished reputation as the wholesome, respected yoga instructor would crumble under the weight of his own actions. But that was just the beginning. Later that afternoon, I paid a visit to the yoga studio's owner. She was a kind-looking woman in her late 50s, with an air of authority that told me she took no nonsense. I explained everything: Jason's affair with a married client, the inappropriate messages, the weekend retreat. Her face hardened as I spoke, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," she said finally, her voice icy. "This will be dealt with immediately." By the time I left, Jason's world was already unraveling. That evening, As Alex cooked dinner, she chatted happily about her day, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Jason. "Why are you doing this? Please, let's talk." I ignored it, focusing instead on Alex's laughter as she stirred a pot on the stove. She looked so normal, so content like nothing had changed. But everything had, and soon she would feel it too. The next morning, it all began to unravel. Jason's text came first. "You ruined me." That was all it said, but it was enough. I could picture him now, fired, humiliated, scrambling to piece together what little he had left. The studio owner had called me earlier that morning to confirm Jason's dismissal. His reputation, carefully cultivated over years, was now in shreds. It was a satisfying start, but the real confrontation was still ahead. Alex had no idea what was coming. That evening, I waited until after dinner to strike. She was scrolling through her phone on the couch, humming softly. I sat across from her, watching her with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome of the conversation. "Alex," I said, my voice even. She looked up, surprised by my tone. "What's up?" "We need to talk." Her expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She set her phone down. "Okay. About what?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "About Jason." Her eyes widened, her breath catching. For a split second, she froze, and I saw the truth written all over her face. But then she recovered, forcing a confused smile. "Jason? What about him?" "Don't," I said, my voice low but firm. "Don't lie to me, Alex." "I know." Her smile faltered, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Know what?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the coffee table between us. The screen lit up with a photo, a still from the footage outside Jason's apartment. Alex, laughing as she stepped out of her car, Jason standing by the door to greet her. Her face drained of color. "Jake, hi." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "I got it all. The texts, the calls, the weekend at Jason's. Every lie you've told me, every moment you've stolen from our marriage. It's all here." Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the photo. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I swear, Jake, it wasn't." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You didn't mean to betray me? To lie to me? To crawl in a bed with another man and throw away everything we built?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "I was lonely, Jake. You were so distant, always working. I needed someone to... Don't you dare blame me for this," I said, my voice like ice. "Don't you dare twist this into something I did. You made this choice, Alex. You did this." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I love you, Jake. Please, I'll do anything to fix this. Please don't leave me." Her words hung in the air, desperate and hollow. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, watching her crumble under the weight of her guilt. And then I spoke, my voice calm and deliberate. "I'm not leaving," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Not yet." She looked up, hope flickering in her tear-streaked face. "You're not?" "No," I said, "because I want you to feel this. Every single day, I want you to remember what you did. I want you to live with the knowledge that you destroyed what we had. And when the time is right, I'll decide what happens next." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Jake, please." But I stood, cutting her off. "You don't get to beg for forgiveness, Alex. Not now. Not ever." I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. Upstairs, I closed the door to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a haze of tension and silence. Alex tried to mend the broken pieces, but I didn't let her. Every apology, every attempt at reconciliation was met with cold indifference. She had shattered the trust we'd built, and I wanted her to feel every jagged edge. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Jason's life had already unraveled. Fired from the studio, blacklisted in the local yoga community, and humiliated by the leaked evidence of his affair. Rumors spread fast, and by the end of the week, his once pristine reputation was in tatters. He was the first casualty of my revenge, but Alex would be the last. I waited until Friday night to make my final move. Alex had been tiptoeing around me all week, trying to gauge my mood, trying to find a way to salvage what was left of our marriage. She was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, her face lighting up with cautious hope. "Jake," she said softly, "can we talk?" "Actually, yes," I replied, my voice calm. "We can." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. I want to—" "No need," I said, cutting her off. "I'm just here to let you know that I've made my decision." Her face fell, her breath catching. "Decision?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "These are divorce papers," I said evenly. "I've already signed them. All that's left is for you to do the same." Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope, staring at it like it might burst into flames. "Jake, please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything." I shook my head, my voice cold. "You've already done enough, Alex. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She sobbed, clutching the envelope to her chest. "I love you," she choked out. "I made a mistake, but I love you. Doesn't that count for anything?" I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "It counts for nothing, Alex. You threw away what we had, and I'm not interested in picking up the pieces." I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I paused, looking back at her one last time. "Oh, and one more thing." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "What?" "You might want to check your emails," I said, a cold smile curling at the edges of my lips. "I sent you something, a little reminder of why we're here." Her confusion was evident as she fumbled for her phone, opening her email. Her face blanched as she stared at the screen, her mouth falling open in horror. The email contained everything: videos, texts, photos. A complete record of her betrayal. I'd sent it to her as a final act of defiance, a permanent reminder of what she had done. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" "Because I wanted you to feel it," I said simply. "Every lie, every betrayal. I wanted you to see it the way I did." I walked out of the house, leaving her sobbing at the table. My car was packed, my exit planned. I didn't know where I was going yet, but anywhere was better than here. The next morning, I received a single text from Jason. "You've ruined my life." I smiled, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. "Good," I muttered to myself. As I drove down the highway, the sun rising on the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: freedom. The weight of Alex's betrayal was still there, but it was lighter now, dulled by the satisfaction of justice served. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done being a victim. And as the road stretched out before me, I felt the first stirrings of hope, a small spark in the ashes of what once was. What do you guys think of my story? Share in the comments what you think about the choice I made, and would you do in my situation.